It's good that you're here in West Michigan right now, and boy, there's been a lot of repercussions, hasn't there, from the shutdown of the government?
Yeah, and fortunately, it was not worse than what it was. We had it over the weekend for the most part. What was going to start to happen, and what was starting to happen on this past Monday, was something called sequester was going to hit the military. Sequester was an agreement that was actually going to roll back spending, and we know that the world has gotten to be more dangerous than it was back when this agreement had been put in place a few years ago. North Korea has come forward with their nuclear program. Obviously, we've seen Syria on the rise and what's happened there. We still have Iran and a number of others. So what we were going to see in the effects of is everything from paychecks to our military men and women not going out if we weren't able to come to an agreement, to these weapons programs and training programs that had been put in place. They couldn't do it. They were canceling National Guard training across the country. And these are men and women who many of them are actually in the process of being deployed. So it was bad all the way around. We were able to also have an agreement to fund the child health insurance program for 6 years. That was a very positive thing. It was expiring in 7 states and more to come, including Michigan, in rapid succession. And it was the frustrating thing, Ed, is that it was needless. It was a needless shutdown. We had agreement on what needed to be moved forward, and there was a group of people that believed that the immigration issue regarding DACA, which is the Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals, is the acronym. It's those kids that have come to the U.S. without any fault of their own, right? Your mom and dad took them while they were 2, 3, 4 years old. We need to deal with that, but there's an expiration that happens in March. And to link those two things up, especially while you saw significant progress happening with negotiations happening on that DACA issue, just didn't make sense. And I think obviously, ultimately, Chuck Schumer and Debbie Stabenow and others realized that and fortunately came to their senses. Now, we still are going to be having a deadline here, February 8, and hopefully we're going to be able to avoid another needless shutdown.
All right, Bill, we have a call this morning. We're inviting calls if you'd like to.
You got it.
To talk to Representative.
It is Talk of the Town. You got it.
Of course it is.
Yes.
And we are this morning, certainly. Yes, and here's a call.
All right.
Good morning, caller. You're on the line with our representative.
Hi there. Good morning. This is Matt in Holland, and wondering if I could ask Congressman Huizenga about the tax cuts. We're hearing a lot of news about big companies like Starbucks and Southwest and all these different companies giving bonuses back to their employees. I'm wondering if you've been able to talk to some of the West Michigan employers, the Gentexes and Herman Millers, smaller to mid-sized companies, and if you've heard any positive news about tax cuts from those companies.
Great call. I appreciate that, Matt. And yes, we have had a lot of private conversations. You've seen some of those smaller, mid-sized companies also make public announcements. We've seen everything from Waste Management and AT&T, a lot of these big publicly traded companies who have literally said they are giving hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses and pay increases and stock options. This is real money into people. And when Nancy Pelosi calls them crumbs, I mean, it's just frankly an insult to working men and women here in West Michigan. This is real change, and we are going to be more competitive. And we got to kind of look back at history here a little bit. President Obama had said and realized that we were uncompetitive in our corporate tax rates. We were at 35%. Much of Europe is in the 20s or even high teens. A number of other places around the world are much lower. He had proposed a 25% corporate tax rate. The House had come in at 20%. The final Senate compromise was at 22%. That's quite honestly probably about where it would have been had it been President Obama negotiating this, even rather than President Trump. But I think there's an understanding that we have to get more competitive on the world stage to make sure that we don't have companies leaving the U.S. On the personal side, this is going to be the month where we're going to see real dollars coming back into people's paychecks. The schedules of withholdings are changing this month. We're going to have to all suffer through April 15 because that's under last year's tax regime. But going forward, we're going to see some real benefits from it. And I've had a lot of private conversations. I'll let companies make their own public pronouncements, but we know that there have been wage increases, that there have been bonuses that have been paid out, that there have been some real impact to folks. And if that's $1,000 or $2,000 to a family that's making $50,000 or $60,000, that's real money. That pays for a washer and dryer. That maybe is the difference on whether they go on spring break or not as a family, or even just out for dinner and a movie. And so we believe that there's going to be a lot of very positive things coming out of tax reform.
Great. Thank you, Congressman.
Hey, all right,
thanks,
you for
Matt.
your call. And a lot of people, I think, are confused, waiting to file for taxes, filing their income tax return, because they think some of these things are going into effect for 2017. They're not. It's for next year. It's 2018's return.
Yeah, correct. We're all gathering up our tax information right now to pay for last year's tax situation. So that'll be due in April of this year, but moving forward, we think there's going to be a lot of very positive things. And look, this was an amazing one too. We saw Chrysler Fiat announce that they are moving a complete truck line back from Mexico into Michigan, into Warren. That's 2,500 direct jobs that are good-paying jobs that are going to be created in Warren. And guess what? For those of us in West Michigan, all of those suppliers that provide, whether it's the visors or the internal combustion parts or whatever it might be, there's going to be more and more demand, and that's going to also see an increase in wages here.
And so many of those suppliers right here in West Michigan.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, we have thousands of them, and at the end of the day, what we need to do is reverse the trend of what had happened. Between 2000 and 2010, we were the only state to literally lose population. Michigan went down by 65,000 people, even though the overall population of the U.S. had gone up. Michigan lost 65,000 people between those two census periods, and it's now time to get people moving back.
Sure. We have another phone call, and thank you, caller, for waiting. Good morning. You're on the line with our representative.
Good morning. I just have some questions kind of off topic of that, but the garbage that comes in from Canada, really just want to know if what you know about that, and I just have huge concerns about it. I know it's probably a good revenue or whatever, but just seems like Michigan is surrounded by water and really don't want any more garbage from any other countries or states. So can you just talk about that a little bit and tell us what you know, and
sure,
and just kind of make me feel better about it, maybe?
Yeah, well, hopefully.
I'll listen.
Okay.
All right, thank you for your call.
Well, this had been much more of an issue back when I was in the state legislature, and what had happened is Canada, and specifically Ontario, had refused to put a permit in for garbage dumps. They had the new government there had said that they were not going to approve any more dumps. And I guess they're waste facilities, a much more modern, more polite way of putting it. But their problem was that they had nowhere to go. This is the city of Toronto, had nowhere to go with their trash, and under the terms of NAFTA, trash is considered a commodity. And so that literally at that point, especially through Port Huron, we were seeing tens and dozens of trucks a day that were crossing over from Ontario into Michigan. And this would have been in the mid-2000s, about 2005, 2006. And that really kind of caused some political crisis in Ontario. And they ended up eventually permitting and allowing for some waste facilities in Ontario. And my understanding, and I'll go back and double check this now and talk to my state reps and senators about what's happening. My understanding that has dropped off dramatically from where we had been back, even 10 years ago. So hopefully that is a specific situation that's been taken care of. It does, I think, demonstrate, though, one of the reasons why after 20 plus years of NAFTA, maybe it's time to start revisiting a few of those issues and taking a look at, with trade where it is nowadays, with the information and the speed of information crossing, is it time to sort of tighten up and revisit NAFTA? And I think that would probably be a good idea.
All right, we have another call this morning. Good morning, caller. You're on the line with Representative Bill Huizenga.
Well, this really doesn't maybe have a lot to do with anything, but he was just talking about Canada. And an interesting thing, I recently found out that if an American citizen wants to go into Canada and they have, or anyone in the car has a DUI, they cannot cross the border. Is this a true statement? Have you ever heard that? And I'll hang up and listen. And if that is the case, Canada is letting all these illegals come in, and they're saying, they got to have a place to go, and yet they're not vetting them, and yet they won't let an American with a DUI come over their border. It's kind of funny. What do you hear?
I appreciate that.
Yes.
And many of you might know, actually, my wife Natalie and I met at Kelvin. She's from Canada originally, so I travel that border back and forth often, and with our kids. And it's changed. You used to just be able to have a driver's license. You now have to have your passport with you and coming back into the U.S. So that border has tightened up a bit. But yes, you are actually correct. If you have had a DUI here in the United States, you are not allowed into Canada automatically. There is a process to do that, but it's somewhat lengthy. And so that's part of our good chunk of our office time is spent doing constituent casework here in West Michigan. And we've got an office in Granville, and we have staff that work on everything from immigration to these kinds of situations and that kind of thing. And maybe actually I want to just give that number out as well. I would want to make sure I was going to do it by memory before I give the wrong number out, and some store in Granville's getting all kinds of phone calls. But if you call 616-570-0917, 570-0917. If you ever have any issues, whether it's with your Social Security, whether it's immigration or adoption issues, whether it's getting a postal issue taken care of, oftentimes we have child support issues that cross state lines. We're able to help with that, and so we'll continue to do that. So I just want to make sure people knew that. But yes, that is in fact the case. With a DUI, you are restricted from coming into Canada automatically, and there's a process to go through.
All right, phone calls keep coming in this morning, Mr. Huizenga, and let's take another call. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Congressman. I have got a question for you, and maybe you can help explain this. There is a memo that was written by the Intelligence Committee, and this is called the FISA memo. And this is where rogue elements within the FBI and other areas of the government, holdovers from the last administration, have tried to overthrow and avert the will of the people voting in the current president, and did some engineering to try to destroy his presidency through some false things. Could you explain that, and when are we going to get to see that memo? Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Excuse me. I've actually read the memo. I've gone into, it's called a SCIF, which is a secured location where we're not allowed to take electronics in, we're not allowed to take notes in or out. And I have read the memo. It's about 4 pages. It outlines some new information. This is where I have to get very careful, though. I have both a legal and a moral obligation to not reveal what is in the memo because it has not been released, and there are some things that have leaked out. I would say, well, I won't go into the accuracy or not. I think that we have to be careful not to overstate the importance of the memo, but we cannot understate the importance of the memo either. And I came out of that SCIF, I came out of that review at the Intelligence Committee, and publicly called for the memo to be released. There is a process, a legal process that has to go through the House of Representatives for that to happen. First and foremost, the Intelligence Committee has to vote to release the memo. Once that happens, it goes for review in front of both the President and the DNI, which is the Director of National Intelligence. The President has said that if he got the memo, he would approve releasing it. The DNI, I don't believe, has spoken publicly about that and probably won't until there is some action from the House. If for some reason it's rejected and not allowed or to be released publicly, the House could then take up the full House could then take up a vote to approve releasing it. So it is it's classified, but it is a House document. It's not a Senate document. It's not a CIA or FBI document. It's a House of Representatives Intelligence Committee document. And so from that standpoint, the House does control it. I don't have a direct say in the release of it right now, other than approaching our leadership and publicly have now stated a number of times that this memo should be released. And the FISA, the FISA, is the Foreign Intelligence Services Act, and that is there's a separate court system that is reviewed, the FISA courts. And it's actually called FISC, F-I-S-C. And at that point, there is a protocol that is supposed to be protecting all of us as citizens from intelligence gathering in areas that are different than if you're a non-citizen, you are not subject to the same constitutional protections when you are overseas than you are as a U.S. citizen and calling in to the U.S. And so this is a very serious issue, and we are on top of it. I suspect when we are back next week, this had been scheduled to be a district work week. In fact, I was supposed to be on a snowmobile up north doing some town hall meetings. We do an annual snowmobile tour, but obviously the weather hasn't cooperated with that. So, but next week, the last I had heard is next week is the Intelligence Committee is looking at holding that vote. But they do have to go through and make sure that they are scrubbing it to. They don't want to reveal sources and methods of how they got this information out to the public, and sometimes a piece of information can be tracked down to a very small group of people, and so they've got to be careful of how they actually do that, but this should be released, and I think it will be released.
It's amazing. Well, I keep thinking all through this process, through the primaries and through the elections, what's with all the leaks? Leaks from everywhere. Doesn't anybody feel an obligation anymore to keep things private? They've been entrusted with this information, and yet somebody wants to leak it out.
Yeah, Ed, some people got to get fired, frankly.
Yes,
they need to lose their jobs, and whether it's within the White House, whether it's within the House or the Senate, it is problematic. And now, having said that, we have seen this explosion in the classification of information. So much is getting classified, and there are some questions as to whether all of that information really does need to be classified. It's almost sort of like when in doubt, just stamp a classified, status on it, and so that doesn't always make sense either. We've got to make sure that we've got an open government that is vital to frankly, our democratic republic that we have. Is that we have an informed electorate, and how you sort through what is truly sensitive material or classified or top secret or all those things versus what's just maybe tough information or interesting information or sensitive information. That process may have gotten a little out of whack, and so we just got to make sure that we are putting the proper protections in, both for our sakes, for our personal information not being shared and being vulnerable to state secrets.